Bravely Default 2 checks almost every box from my personal checklist for JRPGs. It has a beautiful aesthetic, exceptional soundtrack, great sense of exploration with an overworld map, a challenging battle system with a unique mechanic, and most importantly, a character progression system that is central to all the game's strategy and ultimately to the player's success. Its story is average at best, lacking the ambition or dramatic weight that I tend to favor, but it's executed competently and at the very least is never obnoxious or offensively bad. In other words, it's a Bravely Default game, possessing all the same strengths and weaknesses as its predecessors. However, if super challenging boss fights and a robust class system pique your interest, you're in for a treat with this game. There are dozens of ways in which Bravely Default is similar to classic Final Fantasy games, in particular Final Fantasies 3 and 5. The job system is one, and I'll get into that more in a minute, but the story is the other. First, it's important to note that while Bravely Second and Lair was a direct continuation of the first game's story, Bravely Default 2 is an entirely new story and cast of characters. In other words, you don't need to play the previous games to understand what's going on here. The premise puts you in the shoes of 4 heroes of light, warriors chosen by the elemental crystals, who seek to reclaim the powers of the crystals from villains who abuse them, and in the process, restore balance to the world. Each villain, who becomes one of the game's many excellent boss fights, is in possession of a relic called an asterisk, which confers powers upon the user that essentially unlocks a job class. It's in defeating these bosses that the player gains access to new jobs, which in turn gives them the abilities needed to fight the next villain as you move forward in your quest to reclaim the crystals. The game is structured so that each chapter puts the player in a new area of the world, offering a new scenario that involves a struggle to obtain an elemental crystal, with, on average, 3-ish boss fights and 3 new jobs to unlock. All said, the story is safe, lacking the ambition, style, or gravitas that Square became known for during the PlayStation 1 era. However, I can't stress enough that it isn't a bad story by any means, and the presentation is solid all around. Most of the voice acting is fitting, with 1 or 2 exceptions, and the script itself is adequate. However, it tends to telegraph its surprises, has a weak main villain, and overall falls into a few too many cliches. I don't think it serves as a distraction of any kind from what is otherwise an outstanding game, but had the storytelling been stronger, it would have been elevated to a Game of the Year candidate. From a visual and performance standpoint, the game both impresses and leaves something to be desired. The art direction is phenomenal, and I adore the painterly backgrounds they use for towns. The 3DS titles included a 3D feature that gave areas like this a superb sense of scale, and while the Switch doesn't have a 3D feature like that, the developers are still able to capture a similar sense of depth and grandeur. However, the game often runs at a visibly lower resolution with distracting aliasing, and while those painterly backgrounds look spectacular from a distance, as the camera moves in, you can see that they start to fall apart a little bit. There's also a fair amount of frame skipping, long loading times for cutscenes, and other problems that puzzled me, since this game doesn't appear to be overly demanding even for the Switch. Regardless of this, it looks good overall, especially with the wider camera angles, giving the sense that you're looking into a miniature world. One fact that isn't well known among Final Fantasy fans is that Hironobu Sakaguchi's original vision was that of a world presented as a diorama, basically little miniature sets with tiny actors running around inside them. This is how he's approaching Fantasian, the game he's currently working on at Mistwalker, and it's also how Bravely Default 2 feels. This is an aesthetic choice that I really appreciate, and it goes a long way to making the game feel like the great classics I grew up with on the SNES and PS1. This is actually the stated intention for this series, in fact, right alongside other games like Octopath Traveler, I Am Setsuna, and the upcoming Project Triangle Strategy. Basically, they want their older fans who loved the design philosophy of their 90s RPGs to know they haven't forgotten about them, even as the mainline Final Fantasy series moves away from command-based combat and other traditional design principles. Where the game truly shines, however, is in the combat and character progression systems, and despite any other criticisms I might have for the game, this is what keeps me eagerly coming back for more. For a quick breakdown of this game's central mechanic, from which it gets its title, the Brave and Default system allows players to either pass up on a character's turn with a defensive stance to gain battle points, or borrow battle points and go into debt, allowing the character to act more than once in a round. If the latter is chosen, the character will then have to recover the BP debt, leaving them wide open to enemy attacks and won't be able to act again until the debt is repaid. You can brave up to 3 times in a round, allowing for 4 actions, and the choice of whether or not to do this plays out in an interesting little game of risk and reward. If you can wipe out all the enemies in one turn, going full brave, then there's no reason to prolong the battle. In tougher fights, however, you'll have to think more carefully and choose the right moment to brave like that. This is a mechanic I've loved since the first title, and I love it here just the same. However, I've seen a lot of people online saying that the combat is really hard, or that the bosses can be cheap or unfair with their counter abilities and so forth. And it's to this point specifically that I want to direct my attention. The truth is that within this genre, whether or not a battle is difficult has everything to do with your knowledge of the enemy, preparations made, and execution of strategy. That is to say that depending on how you approach it, it can go from what seems impossible to flippantly easy with the snap of a finger. This is a major part of where the fun and satisfaction of command-based RPGs comes from, and Bravely Default, as a series, is one of the best examples of how to invite players to think outside the box and experiment with all the tools they've been offered. While many games will only require you to take advantage of an enemy's elemental weaknesses and maybe throw up a buff or two on your own party, Bravely Default adds layer upon layer of consideration, and it's in taking advantage of the right abilities offered by the job system that you'll always find a good solution. If you really dive into this, you're gonna get the full experience the game is offering you. If a boss has a high chance of countering physical attacks and does so with devastating damage, you'll want to use the Black Mage job and refrain from braving if you do choose to use physical attacks. If a boss is weak to axes and there are powerful monsters in the area that wield axes, use the Beastmaster job to capture them, then unleash them against the area's boss. It sounds like common sense when I put it this way, but often JRPG players get stuck in traditional strategies that can be applied across the board, rather than paying attention to what the current game is subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, suggesting for you to do. There's no shame in losing in your first attempt on a boss while learning what his or her gimmick is, then coming back fully prepared to wipe the floor. Thinking about it this way, Bravely Default 2 has a lot more to offer than your standard JRPG battle system, and it's the sole reason why I give this game a full recommendation. It may not have the greatest story ever told, and that's usually very important to me, but nonetheless, I keep finding myself eager to come back when my workday ends. I find myself thinking about it throughout the day, and that's not something that often happens to me with video games. In short, the story can't be your why when it comes to the decision to play Bravely Default 2. Rather, it has to be the boss fights. If that's the case, I think most fans of old-school JRPGs are going to find a lot to love here. If not, and this kind of thing seems frustrating to you, then you might want to skip it. But this is definitely the kind of JRPG that is my jam. I am all over games like this. That being said, I'm going to continue working on finishing it, and will update you with more thoughts if they come to me along the way. In any case, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon with a new video.